And I want to tell you that these changes that we'll review today are not the whimsical work of a minute and a half or a week and a half or a month and a half or even a year and a half. Bob Walsher chaired the committee that began making the changes several years ago. Debbie Davis did her best to herd cats to try to get us all, into a system that would speed up the inspection process. I think one of our biggest challenges right now in the business right now is that every sale gets renegotiated after the inspections are done. When I started selling real estate in 1973, we didn't do any inspections. We just sold the house. We were just fat and dumb and happy. Files were about 7 pieces of paper thick, and it was surprise. And the word was caveat emptor, buyer beware, and what you see is what you get. And there was no such thing as a sewer camera, and we didn't know about radon yet, and it was a lot more fun. Our lives have gotten so complicated, and truly, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think every sale gets renegotiated now after inspections are done. So there are kind of 2 rounds of selling the house. Bill Hague and I are doing that together today. Maybe it's sold, maybe it's not. We'll know in another couple of days. I think the most important thing I can say here to you today is we need your help. I will chair this committee this year. Bryon will chair this committee next year. We need to hear from you what's working, what isn't working, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. With the changes that we're recommending, or that we came up with as a recommendation to the board that you now see in front of you as an approved contract form. When we first met last January, we thought we were going to be done with that by March. In June, we thought one more meeting is certainly going to do it, and in November, we were still tweaking it. When I read it last night again to get ready for this meeting, I found a couple of words I brought to Bryon when I got here today to say, did you know this was in here? Have you seen this? Did you? It's very hard to distance ourselves from what we know we mean and read the words we write as what we've actually said. I had a customer ask me recently, a buyer called and said, I've decided to close a week early. And I said, well, the seller isn't ready to move out a week early. And the buyer said, it says right here on my contract, I can close on or before, and possession on or before. And I said, well, the seller would have to agree to that. And he said, well, it doesn't say that. And it wasn't wrong, it wasn't, So, you guys out in the field working, please tell us. Please, 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 please tell us. Please tell us what works, what doesn't. We sit in the meetings and we talk about what we want to get on paper. In the last meeting, somebody brought up a point that the inspection clause, in this case, had a point that wasn't quite making sense. We drafted 3 sentences to try to explain what we were talking about, and then somebody piped up and said, if we just took these 2 words out, that would do it. Boom. I can't tell you how easy it is to lose the forest for the trees in what we're doing, and you guys can help us. With the changes with this year's contract, have you all seen them before today? Has anybody seen them before today? No, you haven't. Here we go. Two of you. Well, here we go. 3 here. Have you had sales training in your companies yet about it all? No. And Tanya, is Tanya still here? Where'd she go? There you are, Tanya. I'm looking right over the top of your head. Tanya. Oh, you. Tanya, when do these go into zip forms? When do they go into effect? When is this our new contract?
That's a Denise question.
That's a Denise question.
They told me February 28th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so last I heard they're waiting on Instinet or zip forms. One of them is not up and ready yet, so
that's kind of target, February 28th.
Yeah, started the 19th.
Right?
What month? This month.
Well, probably the change that's talked about the most, the change that's getting the most buzz is by popular demand, the tolerance for repairs is back. My personal preference was never one way or the other very strongly. I didn't care, but today it would help Bill Hague and me a whole lot in the deal we're involved in. And it was When we surveyed the membership a little over a year ago, it was the point that we heard from more than any other. Probably 80% of the responses to the survey were all about the tolerance for repairs, the aggregate dollars tolerance for repairs and the inspection clause. But let's go through this in order, the changes. Our wonderful, wonderful staff, is this Denise too? Yeah. I prepared highlighted changes in the contract. Bryon, the escrow clause, Bryon brought it to our attention that he was getting unhappy calls from people who couldn't understand. Our contract said, you know, will I get my earnest money back if there are problems with clauses 2, 5, 9, 10, 13, or 15? My sales falling through over problems with this clause, send me my earnest money. And we can't, right?
Yeah, the next paragraph after that is the one that no buyer ever acknowledges having read. And for sure, you never told them that, and yeah, and it kind of makes a liar out of us for even having that first, the middle paragraph in there in the first place.
And we discussed at length even taking the whole middle paragraph out, and in the end, we decided to make it bold to try to get somebody to read that paragraph once in a while, notwithstanding any other terms of this contract provided for forfeiture. And then we changed a single word above. We took out shall and said may, because you know what? If the seller doesn't approve, I have a sale, I have an earnest money deposit at Kirk & Cobb that I think has been there for 20 years. The buyer's agent miscalculated the house payment for the buyer. The seller had put the house on the market. We had planned an extravagant open house. It was a flip job, and he had worked really hard to get the house ready to put on the market, and he kept trying to put the house on the market, and I kept saying, no, not until it's showing as well as it's ever going to show. We're not going to put the house on the market before that day. We had sent invitations to the neighbors. We had a special ad. We were doing this special open house, a big splashy thing, and the buyer bought the house before we got to the open house. We canceled the open house. It was the first person who saw the house, and a week later it turned out that she had misunderstood what her house payment was going to be, the buyer, and wanted out. Even though she qualified, she just wanted out. Well, the seller felt like he'd given up a key moment in time in launching the marketing of the house. He wasn't about to give her earnest money back. He felt for her, but he wasn't going to sign something saying she would give her earnest money back. She's never been willing to sign anything giving the seller the earnest money. She felt like, you know, she shouldn't be held accountable for an honest mistake on her part. And the earnest money sits there. Because we can't release it, no matter how strong our opinions is, no matter how obvious it is. Judy?
Helen, the only thing that bothers is the earnest money of the inspection should be paid. If the seller doesn't sign it, he pays the inspections.
And that's a good one.
The realtor.
Yes.
Or somebody. I mean,
Well,
so is there any way in there the seller can get the money back? They don't have to sign, but they have to have the inspections paid. I don't know.
and you would hope that at least buyer and seller could agree on that much. In this case, no
But they
inspections
don't.
had been done yet, but yeah. And we talked about, and it's something to think about, we talked about taking it out altogether. About no longer having inspectors paid out of earnest money at all, and leaving it to inspectors to collect the earnest money from buyers on their own. We wondered if, there are realtors who think that would be their worst nightmare because they would feel responsible for the inspectors they brought into the deal, and there are realtors who think that would be something to celebrate, is to leave it to the inspectors to chase down those buyers on their own, on every deal. Doesn't this get interesting fast? I know I'm not answering your question, I'm just making trouble. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is it making another question?
I know, there are more questions, So, the committee decided to recommend no more for now than to simply clean up the language so that a buyer isn't reading his earnest money shall be returned, maybe his earnest money will be returned, maybe upon agreement from the seller, and then to make bold the language we're not sure most realtors have ever read. Barb raised a good question. Bryon, you weren't there. When we presented these changes to the board of directors, Barb was saying that some lawyer might grab onto that notwithstanding word and, Barb, you want to talk about that?
Well, it's just, again, why have anything else in there if this paragraph is notwithstanding any other terms of the contract, well then,
Who
it
needs
would
the
rule.
rest of the
It
clause?
would rule, because if we did something else, we didn't follow this.
Yeah, anything else you put in there is negated by the notwithstanding
Exactly.
other terms, so it's.
And that language is statutory.
I know.
I mean, it's right out of the statute.
Yeah.
It says,
Yes.
um,
And so there we go. We can, I think I could spend a year working on this clause. As I read it, if I've never seen this contract before, do I really understand what happens? We talked about maybe we should develop just a punch list of what happens. Haven't had the energy to do that yet. I'm looking for volunteers. Any other questions about this, or are you ready to move on?
I mean, about earnest money. I mean, I probably see more earnest money disputes than most of you. I hope I do, anyway. And like I said, nobody has read that paragraph, or especially a buyer that wants their money back, but has to be agreed to by the buyer and seller. And title companies that hold earnest money have exactly this. I mean, they are not going to dispose of that earnest money until there's an agreement that the buyer and seller consent to how they're doing it. And we're really blessed in Topeka by having a small claims court procedure that's pretty simple, and it's not very expensive. I mean, it's like $45 filing fee or something like that. And the judge, neither party can have an attorney. They go there like Judge Judy on TV, and they say their piece, and the judge says what the answer is, and they can, and the judge has authority up to $4,000, and it's over and done. And so when somebody, sometimes I listen to somebody that's mad, and they will occasionally say, and I'm gonna sue you. And I say, great, the name of the company is Griffith and Blair, Inc. And if you get that right there, and when the judge issues the order, we'll know exactly what to do. And that's really the great way for us to handle earnest money disputes, the small claims court.
Bryon, we're on YouTube, and I'm going to ask you to come sit on this table so that you can be on the camera. Valuable stuff.
If I say anything, I'll come over there.
Okay. I am so grateful Bryon has given years to this committee. Lawyers really do know things that the rest of us haven't been trained to know, and have a perspective, and Bryon's background in practicing law and then owning other businesses and then being in this business has been invaluable to all of us. And then, as Bryon says, he gets different phone calls than I get, and that made me stop and think. It's a great resource for all of us, and we all owe him big for all the time he's put in. So, all right, ready to go on? You want to talk about this one some more? I think the next change is on page 4. We've had some issues with inspectors causing damage to property. I had an FHA appraiser who did $900 worth of damage to a window recently, trying to prove bedroom windows opened. It happens. It happens. And so from membership, someone brought the issue to our attention, and we added some words to say, that these are the buyer's inspectors, and this is the buyer's responsibility, and the buyer can deal with the inspector.
And the inspector just walks away clean.
Well, the inspector's not a party to our contract, so I think the buyer and the inspector have things to talk about, but that's not between buyer and seller like the contract is.
Well, that just seems odd to me, because let's say an inspector, worst case scenario, shows up drunk, throws a lit cigarette into a trash can, the house is uninsured, and burns to the ground. My buyer has to pay for that?
Your buyer chose the inspector.
I think my buyer's gonna quit doing that.
I
I mean,
mean, your buyer hired and chose the inspector. Your buyer, you know, has some responsibility for who they brought into somebody else's house.
looks like they've got the only responsibility by contract.
Between buyer and seller, who else could it be?
Well,
Bob?
Your example,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
the
cut you short.
appraiser, is that covered?
Not so far. I think this says inspector, not, or inspections. I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
no, I'm just saying that just seems to be something that would be better left to the court to decide who's responsible, rather than by contract making the buyer
I
responsible.
think you have a perfect argument for the buyer to take up with the inspector, is the buyer goes to small claims court and say, I got left on the hook for the damage you did to the house. But our contract's only between buyer and seller. The inspector doesn't sign the contract.
Well, but the owner can take both the buyer or the inspector or both to court if something happens.
And it's a valid argument, but the committee's decision was when the buyer chooses the inspector, the buyer takes on the responsibility. That, you know, the seller shouldn't be responsible for it. They can't.
Well, but the seller okays that
The
inspector.
seller doesn't pay it, and it's, you know,
I mean,
and
I would not, personally, when I buy a house, that gets crossed out.
And there is no single answer, you know. I will tell you, the courts are full of highly skilled attorneys who have different points of view on all kinds of things, you know. There's no, you're not wrong, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying the committee thought you were wrong. I'm saying the decision ended up sliding this direction
Well,
in a very controversial issue.
I'm just saying, it doesn't seem to me that's a decision we needed to make in the first place, but, okay.
And I just asked for feedback and then I argue with you. I'm sorry about
That's
that.
it. No, that's the feedback.
That's Carrie.
And also, as agents, I've had agents on the other side when it was my listing, or my buyer, trying to dictate what inspectors we used.
Yeah.
And I would say, who does that agent now take on responsibility?
And again, that's a legal question, you know. I can give you my personal opinion, and my personal opinion is the seller who dictates one specific inspector gives himself some liability. The seller who says, really not this inspector, this is my ex-brother-in-law, I don't want him in my house, but choose someone else, or choose any of these 5, you know, I would think that would dilute his responsibility. But you make the best one, the buyer and seller both agree before this deal is done.
They do, and this is the kind of thing that bounces back on realtors if they even give a slight suggestion of which inspector to go with. Because then the buyer says, well, you're the idiot that told me to use him.
Exactly,
Bingo.
exactly, yeah.
Using up gas money to get to Mexico.
You know, I didn't think we'd have very much to talk about today, and we're only on page 5, we've only gotten started. This is more interesting than I thought it was gonna be. I told Dan Crow last night, we'll be done in 5 minutes, there's just nothing to say. Can we move on to page 5? Is that okay? Racing on. This is new. We've talked about this for at least a decade that I'm aware of. That we decided to say out loud what my experience has been the practice for quite a while. That if it's listed in the seller's disclosure statement, we don't expect to be renegotiating that with an inspection. My assistant Sherry and I change every seller's disclosure statement for all of my listings to say that the humidifier on the furnace doesn't work. Never met a buyer who cared when they're buying the house, but boy God, when they get that inspection in, all of a sudden, and it says the humidifier on the furnace doesn't work, they want a new humidifier on that furnace. Well, if we just said it didn't work in the seller's disclosure statement, and then I say to the selling agent, you know, that was disclosed all along, every selling agent I work with says, oh, okay, fine, we're done with that, move on. We decided to make the contract reflect what most of the practice has been. That was controversial too. There were issues about, Debbie managed many discussions about, is the foundation damage really what the seller disclosed in the seller's disclosure statement, or is it, beyond what the buyer understood when they signed that seller's disclosure statement? Is there, where does it begin and end? Lots of judgment calls, you guys. We are not going to save everybody and every deal from a disagreement. We're not going to save everybody from every lawsuit. But it is the general practice, in my experience, and tell me if I'm wrong, that most realtors point back to the seller's disclosure statement and say, yeah, I'm not talking about, we told you the toilet in the basement isn't functional, we told you that the chimney's decorative, we told you don't even talk to me about now $3,000 to make the fireplace wood burning, you know, that's all been done. So we made note of that. We've been working on trying to tighten up and speed up the inspection process. That's the root of all of the changes from the last few years. And then we get into calendar days or business days. And so you'll see the note that we're specifying calendar days. On page 6, you know, these paragraphs at the bottom in the yellow, these are the ones that Risk Management Committee has agonized over the most for, gosh, Bob, how long has it been? 5 years? Yeah, we've hashed over and hashed over and hashed over. Debbie, Tony Schenck brought red boxing gloves to one meeting because, you know, it was so. And I failed to say, as I talk about the people in this room, no one has invested more blood, sweat, and tears in this than Stuart Elliott. He's not here today, but when you talk to him next, thank him. That man has poured heart and soul into this. He's drafted language, he's brought language to meetings to let us kick around, and it does get kicked around, and it's pretty hard to leave not feeling abused. And he finally just got tired of it. Can you imagine? But we all owe him a debt of gratitude for years of talking about this clause and others. At the top, you see, we crossed out the part about utilities. That got crossed out because it was a duplicate. Vern Jarbo pointed out to us, we'd said that twice in the contract, that the seller will have the utilities on for inspectors. And I think it's in 13F in the first paragraph, and now
It's on page 4.
or on page 4, thank you. Oh, and the inspection clause,
Couple
13.
lines of that page.
13, there you go. Thank you, thank you. I told you I would need you today. I told you. Yeah, so the only reason that's crossed out, we still want sellers to have utilities on to be ready for inspectors. The only reason that's crossed out is Vern Jarbo pointed out to us, we'd already said that. So you know, save a little ink and a little paperwork. Last night, when I read this contract, I noticed in the last 5 lines, there's a couple places we used such choice buyer's notice. What? See how hard it is, you guys? I can't tell you how many thoughtful minds have worked hard on this. Does that really make sense? Such choice buyer's notice? I'm sorry, we missed it. We knew what we meant. It's there. I don't think it'll do any harm, but we'll clean it up in the next round of contracts. You know, the aggregate tolerance for repairs comes back. We took out the results of inspection addendum and the seller's response forms. They seem to, and again, I'd be grateful for your feedback. In my experience, they seem to just make people mad. That results of inspection form, both listing agents and sellers just got mad. They just, you know, it was a source, instead, you know, and the buyer's agent was under the gun to have that in by a certain day, or they were going to get to buy the roof or the sewer or whatever. We have agents in town who got to buy some expensive things. And so they couldn't just carry on a friendly conversation with the listing agent. They had to get that form in, had to get it filled in, you know, and get it presented. And then it seemed to aggravate anger. So, you know, on the other hand, we didn't want to lose the expedited timeline. We wanted to be sure things were moving along. We didn't want buyers and sellers surprising each other the day before closing with their demands. And so you know, it's softened up some so that it's a little more vague about exactly how that written notice is going to be exchanged, but the timeline stays. You know, 5 days back and forth. You know, let's get it resolved. Let's move on down the road. Are there any questions about that?
So is there a specific form if we're saying there has to be written notice?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. And when Stuart presented this language to the committee, his description was that email would serve, that an amendment form would serve, you know, that I can email you and say, here's what my buyer's thinking, and you can email back and say, that's gonna make my seller flip out. Let's think how we can massage this to be a workable system. And we have begun our conversation in a timely manner. Bryon has said that you know, he may develop a form and we may all copy it when he does. We may all see how that goes. You know, it's an experiment. You know, every year we need your feedback, but this year we really need your feedback. It's an experiment. Let's see how it goes. Let's see. But what we did know is we need to stop making each other mad with what we have to do on every sale anyway. Okay, you know. So, you're thinking of a particularly good story. Yeah, a good one. I'd be glad to hear it. Shall we race right along?
All right, just a quick consensus opinion I was curious about. We're getting a lot of these inspections where the inspector puts price on stuff. And within 5 days after that inspection, it's awful hard to get bids. Are we kind of tying ourselves to the inspector's numbers? I mean,
well, that's why we did away with the aggregate in the first place. I remember the words coming out of Debbie Davis' mouth that tipped my vote was, we're negotiating sales on bad math from whole house inspectors who can't be hired to do the work. Why are we doing that? You know, 5 days is a tight timeline to get extra bids in, but you can always write the demand that you know, you need another 3 days to get your guy in to bid the job. You can always, you know, I think the point is to begin the conversation within 5 days. Absolutely within 5 days. You know, you know, you don't have to have the specific demand hammered out. You can say, you know, these things are of concern to the buyer. Now the buyer wants to research in further detail, you know, these issues. And the seller can agree or not or whatever, but we, you know, we only hope that the conversation begins. And, you know, it was, you know, when Tony brought the boxing gloves, it was over, buyers are going to ask for everything, like my buyer is on Bill's listing today. Or, you know, despite all of my counseling, despite, you know, I tried, despite they know I'm here presenting today that we're not going to let them do that anymore, I thought, you know, Debbie's point is bad math. You know, we get lazy, we get in a hurry, we go with the whole house inspector's numbers. But the overwhelming response from the membership was, it was worse to not have any numbers. It was worse to not have any aggregate automatic acceptance. It was, you know, and probably the complaint that resonated the most was experienced agents who said, my own buyers aren't behaving. You know, no matter how well I prepare them, no matter how well I counsel them when the inspection's given. So we put it back, absolutely by popular demand. It was, when we surveyed the membership, I think it was 80% of the responses we got asked for the aggregate back. So, and we put in a 1% as a guideline. At one point we talked about just flat making it 1%. And you know, in one meeting we decided we would, and in the next meeting we decided, oh, maybe we'll put in a blank with a suggestion of 1%. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. You know, years ago, you know, you and I have talked about before, Bob, the contract simply said 1/4 of 1%, but that was before we had radon and sewer cameras. That was when we'd only have one plumbing inspection or something. We barely had whole house inspectors yet. In this day and age of whole house inspections and you know, the deal Bill and I are working on today, there's a whole house inspection and a roof inspection and an electrical inspection and a radon inspection and a sewer inspection. You know, when we had a 1/4 of 1% tolerance, we never heard of doing all those inspections. So, questions, comments, helpful tips, grammar corrections? You know, it's important to say, and the language has been slightly rearranged so it's highlighted, but it's important to say that if we're not hearing from a buyer, or if you know, if the buyer's just letting it slide, then the buyer's bought the house as is. and that's what you see highlighted on 7. 8 stays the same. And then the last page you have, if we're ready to move on, is KAR's form for rescinding a contract. There's been a form floating around we've all used for as long as I can remember. I don't know who drafted it originally. It's a simple form, like half a page, and the typists type in which inspectors get paid and then who gets the remaining earnest money. Vern Jarbo said to us, and Linda Bryon suggested, our legal counsel's paid for. They're on retainer, we have them. She said, why don't they sit in on these meetings? And I gotta tell you, Vern Jarbo has been invaluable in the last couple of meetings. My experience has been that it's hard to get an attorney's attention to really sit still for some of this stuff. But when he's trapped in the room with us for an hour-and-a-half meeting and he has nothing else to do but listen to us and look at the contract and talk with us, we really get some good stuff. And Vern knows some stuff. He works all over the state. He's seen contracts from all over the state. And he said, KAR has a really good rescission form. I've never understood why you guys don't use it. And we said, what rescission form? So here it is. It's not mandatory at all, but we asked the staff to include it on zip forms and Instinet to make it available to you. And, it is kind of well thought out. It's pretty darn good. Do you have comments? Something I missed?
I like that form because I've seen some really bad ones, some of which were a product of our office, and I love this one because it has a release in it. It releases the buyer, releases the seller, releases the person holding the escrow agent, releases the licensees, and when you draw that up, in a big chief tablet and write it out longhand, or you type it up on your own typewriter if you have typewriters anywhere, it looks kind of self-serving. Well, yeah, you're going to release the earnest money, but you want to be released from all liability, and it's your fault anyway. So, but when it's in a form, it's just evidence. Oh, this is the standard method of operation, and so yeah, I'm a big fan of that form, and it's got some additional provision space down there. So if there is a survey or something and the earnest money isn't enough to handle it, you can agree right there whose responsibility it is to pay for that additional inspection. Or if the buyer has already taken the washer and dryer out of the house, they have to return the washer and dryer. Or my favorite one is, I don't want this buyer to ever see one of our listings again. Put that in.
That's great. Well, and our goal as a risk management committee is to give you as many good tools as we can. And let me say, one of the smartest things said here today was your comment that when I write a contract, I think I'll take that out. This contract is not gospel. This is a form to try to help you sell houses. You get to change what you want. You have to do it in an obvious way. You don't get to put this into your word processor and rearrange some of the language and then present it to another realtor so it looks like the contract. They think they know what it says, and we had a realtor who did that. Somebody thinks of everything, which didn't occur to us until it happened, which is what happens a lot on risk management, is we hear a lot of, wow, that didn't occur to us until somebody did it. But you don't get to do that. You don't get to deceive another realtor by presenting a contract that looks like the familiar form and there's no emphasis on what you've changed. But you use a big bold black pen and you make it clear that this has been changed. You can change anything on it. I routinely squiggle through the clauses that aren't being used in a contract when I write an initial offer for a buyer. And I've had realtors tell me it's illegal. No, really, it's not. No. I wrote as soon as possible. And the inspection deadline on a contract recently, and a realtor told me it was illegal, and I thought, well, so you call the police? Or no, it's not illegal. Really, these are blanks. You can fill in anything you want. On page 8 in that blank, I've had cats and dogs written in. You wonder if there are cats written in the contract, what happens if they don't live to closing? I have, you can do creative things with the contract as long as you're expressing yourself clearly. There's a realtor to whom I owe a humble apology. When the very first time I used InstaNet, the font that I used on page 8 to say the seller would contribute $6,000 toward the buyer's loan closing costs was like font size 4 instead of legible 10 or 12. I didn't know how to change it. I just thought that's how it was. Debbie's the one who taught me you can type in the tax blanks without having a drop-down window. I didn't know that. So the agent presented the offer and called and told me it had been accepted, and then a couple days later she found the teeny tiny one, and she called back kind of angry, and it wasn't that I was trying to deceive her. I just didn't know how to make the words any bigger. It's here, it's your contract, use it as suits you. Tell us what you think, tell us how it goes, and tell me if you have any more questions today. Woohoo! Thank you for your input. Honestly, I told you in private, these people know as much as I do.
I might mention one before you get up. With the advent of Zillow and sites like that becoming our MLS substitute, we have the opportunity to see contract forms other than our own local board forms. So like if you get an offer on a Kansas City contract, there is no aggregate in the Kansas City contract. It says you have your 10-day inspection period. After you get your inspections, let's talk. And if there is the slightest defect, then you have to agree. The state form, which a lot of realtors use, and it's legal for us to use it as well, has an aggregate in it, and the Lawrence contract has an aggregate in it, but they're not like our aggregate. The state aggregate has a spot for a dollar amount, and in the state contract, the seller agrees to pay the first, if it's $500, up to $500 of any defect that's found. And if the defects exceed $500, then the seller has an option to cancel the contract if you can't work it out. The Lawrence aggregate is the one is really cool. So say you fill in the blank $500. The buyer is agreeing to accept the first $500 of expenses in the Lawrence contract. But if the defects exceed that, the buyer has the right to say to the seller, I want you to fix all those. But in the Lawrence contract, the buyer is still paying the first $500 of anything they ask to be fixed, which I thought was kind of a unique way to handle it. I think that works really well in Lawrence. I've heard that a lot of Lawrence agents just write 0 in that blank, but which kind of makes it like the Kansas City contract. But when you see a blank and it's just an aggregate, don't assume that it's like ours, because ours is one of a kind.
And I'm glad you said that. Don't go anywhere. I need you. That camera wants to see your face.
Mm-hmm.
You touched on a point I should have emphasized and I did not. We did bring back the seller's right to remedy a problem in this version of the contract. We didn't realize we'd taken it out in the last version of the contract. It wasn't until there was a problem deal and the smart attorney read us our contract that we realized it had come out. So that's back, that the seller's right to remedy. When other realtors come to show my listings from out of town, if they're not a member of our multiple listings system, I routinely tell other realtors, when they call to ask if I'll pay a commission, well, can they show my listing even though they're not a member? I will say that I'll pay the commission, but I'm not qualified to deal with another contract. I have a bazillion hours invested in trying to understand this contract, and I still learn things about it. I'm not qualified to deal with the Kansas City contract or the state contract or the Lawrence contract. And if you want to sell my listing, you got to work with the contract I'm familiar with. When they're a member of our multiple listing system, I maybe don't have as much control, but I still counsel with the seller. This contract scares me, I don't know it, I haven't lived it, I want to counter that we have to use the contract form I'm familiar with. And so far that has worked for me 100% of the time. I think it's very scary for realtors to go out and start, trying to practice. And I need you especially because it would be, a legal counsel question, are we qualified? But you all showed up for training on a contract that you're pretty familiar with, and most of the changes are putting language back you've seen before. Here you are, I think I'm singing to the choir. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
If y'all want to bring an offer on a cocktail napkin, we'll accept that and work out the details.
We'll work it out.
Yeah.